Well, yeah, obviously.
Well, it looks really good. I think you did a good job.
They did,
Thanks.
they did, and they did it beautifully.
What's wrong? Why are you leaving?
I don't know, it's just like, yeah, it's cool and all, but come on, you know, it kind of gets old pretty fast. It's like, I just don't feel like the potential here is being really realized. Imagine using geometry nodes like this in like some kind of workflow, or like using it while making an actual like an animation that you'd normally make, and you can use it to do all kinds of things you could never do before. Like imagine you don't even need particle systems, and God knows they were a pain in the ass to use. And well, come on, why do you even ask them? You know what? I don't even care if they don't want to hear what I have to say, because I have all of you. Of course, I like to be all-inclusive, and I understand that some people watching might not quite get the idea of what geometry nodes are. In other words, wasteland and wolfman kind. So let's do a quick rundown, yeah? So traditionally in Blender, you start with a primitive shape, like a cube, and then you move it around, you can scale it or rotate it, and then you can go into edit mode and adjust and so on and so forth. Say you want to do the same thing with geometry nodes, instead you'd add a cube mesh node and you can plug that into the output. You add a set position node in between them, which allows you to again move the mesh, and to scale it we can add a vector math node and a position node, plug it in like that, and then you can set it to multiply and then plug that into the offset, which then allows you to scale the mesh. Well, now you might be asking, the nodes just seem so much more complicated. What's the point? Why is everyone making such a big deal out of geometry nodes? Well, okay, first, that's the entire point of the video, you impatient brat. But if you want the short version because you're so important and busy, here you go. Mainly using math and scripting in various ways, it allows you to procedurally create geometry that would probably be tedious and not look as good otherwise. And obviously, the benefit of it being procedural like that is there's plenty of things that you can adjust and fine-tune depending on how you build the node tree. And if that still doesn't quite wrap your little head around it, no? Okay. I think the use case in this video is going to be a great example, but of course, I am a bit biased. I often see these crazy abstract renders made using geometry nodes, which granted look cool, but it's like, okay, I want to see if I can find a more practical use here. Oh, and I hope you kept up with the little thing I did with the cube in the beginning, because next up we're making this. Yeah, this one's a doozy, but don't worry, we'll go step by step. Let's
break it down!
And let me make this clear, a week ago, all I could do with geometry nodes was actually just move around a cube. So for the first few days I was just doing tutorial after tutorial after tutorial.
Nuts with Willem!
This video uses pre-made node groups from one add-on. Set add-on and its creators channel will be linked in the description. Also linked below you will find a playlist containing all the tutorials used in this video to learn the basics of geometry nodes. I hope it is helpful.
To kind of get my bearings, I am a small town boy after all.
This is so sexy!
I wanted to try and get a better idea of the limitations and capabilities of geometry nodes before I started a project of my own. I feel like now's the time to say I'm officially starting beef with everyone who goes, oh no, I don't like tutorials, I like to just jump in and figure it out for myself. Yeah, you're so tough, eh? Anyway, that's besides the point. After doing all these tutorials, I came up with a perfect idea for a practical use of geometry nodes that would also help me get better at using them. Because I do find that after a point, tutorials just really don't do much and you have to dive in and figure it out for yourself. But throughout the process, I did still look at tutorials to, get some tips or tricks or help me when I was stuck. I decided to pull out this old character. Yeah, this is a character I made a little while ago. I'm gonna make an animation of him making a fireball and then turning that fireball into his pitchfork. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Starting with the fire. I basically wanted to scatter a bunch of planes with a fire texture on them in like a half sphere shape to give the illusion of fire with depth. First I needed a mesh to scatter points on. An icosphere I cut in half by using a cube for a boolean. I made a plane that I used as an instance. I made a procedural fire shader, but obviously shaders aren't the point of this video, so I'm not going to go through that. If you're interested, here it is. Do what you will with this information. Next was the trickiest part. I needed to get the planes to rotate around the sphere in just how I wanted. And I did this using Euler to vector and rotate instances node, and then it's just guesswork from there, adjusting the values until it looked kind of right. And then to add even more depth, I thought it would be better if the planes kind of had like a... So I added a noise texture with this plugged into a vector. The scene time node was to make it move over time, and then some math nodes to make sure it's moving at the right speed and in the right direction. This next part is kind of weird to explain, but it's basically using a bounding box generated from the same sphere I used to distribute the flames to make the noise have a stronger effect on the plane the higher up it goes on the z-axis. Then I subdivided and used a set position node to make sure the noise would actually affect the plane, and this I plugged into it before the plane is instanced onto the points. Then I used one last transform node so I could make any kind of final adjustments. And I was actually surprised with the quality of the result. The only issue is there's some strange rotation problems I couldn't fix, which made some of the weird artifacts near the top of the fireball. Man, all that talking and I'm still just at one part of one group. Okay, no, I'm not going in depth anymore. I am not your damn teacher. It's time to hurry this along. But, don't worry, I'll still show all the nodes in case you want to, follow along. So next up, the smoke. I thought the best way to make this would kind of have a plane that gets larger and then resets once it reaches max size and do it again. Creating somewhat of an endless infinite loop that when I do it to you, it'll be worse than death. No, I'm sorry, that was far too violent. I've been watching too much Rick and Morty. First I made a plane and then I made a smoke texture. Again, not going over the shaders, so here's just a quick overview of that. There's this cool trick, you can use a mix node to switch between two positions for an object, and then these nodes will make it so the factor goes from 0 to 1 and then resets and does it over again. Actually, and we're gonna do a little story time here. When I was trying to get the factor to reset to 0, my first attempt was I made this whole fancy node tree with tons of like compare and math nodes, and then I realized that could all be done in a single node that did it all, and it did it better. Sometimes the easiest solution is the last thing on your mind.
That's deep!
These nodes, they make the smoke scale up more the higher it goes, and the node setup I used to make the fire go, I use that again here. Also, I know it's a modifier, not a geometry node, so it's kind of cheating. I used a simple deform to make the smoke bend so I could kind of simulate inertia when animating it. The smoke doesn't look the best, but it's actually usually pretty hard to see in most lighting, so I was okay with that. And the last part of the fireball is the sparks. They are actually easily the simplest of the three. I copied over the nodes I used to make the smoke scale change, but instead used them to move the points. The instance is just a cylinder with an emission shader. The only sort of unique thing here is these three nodes I used to make them spin. Kind of a dirty way to do it, but it works fine for something so small. But that doesn't mean that small things don't deserve some attention too. And with that, the fireball's done. All these nodes are actually in the same group. It's all technically one mesh, which is pretty crazy. No, crazy to you, normal to me. Oh, right. One last thing, you might have noticed some of the nodes I didn't talk about. I plugged some nodes directly into the input, so I could scale up and down aspects of the fireball straight from the modifiers tab, which was basically just to make animating it easier. Speaking of animation, that's what's up next. I brought our old friend, reddemon.blend, into the file and started animating. I got up to this point and then, well, oh. You thought we were done with nodes, eh?
Wrong, sir. Wrong!
So, to make his pitchfork appear, the basics of it were actually pretty simple and I figured it out pretty fast. Then I decided I wanted some noise, yo, and some variation, yo. And oh, that's where things started getting a little bit more complicated. After plenty of trial and error, I found a solution. And that was, add a second cube at the other end of the trident to have a gradient going in the opposite direction, and then add the value of this gradient to the original falloff, adjust and invert it with a color ramp. Then make another input value node so that this new gradient is controlled by one slider, plug this value into the first falloff node, but add a subtract node between the other falloff node to make sure it's going from 0 to 1 instead of 1 to 0. The math node is just to fine tune and scale, then multiply this new gradient texture with a noise texture. To combine this noisy center gradient with the original gradient, I use a mix node set to screen, and there you go. Simple, elegant solution. You know what was so cool? Actually, it was cooler than cool, it was ice cold. After I finished figuring all that out, I realized that I could have just made the second gradient using a proximity falloff on an object, and then animating it to move along the mesh. No, this way I did it is better. It took me hours to figure out, but oh, it's just so much more convenient because now I can animate it all with one slider. Then I made the sparks and flames appear with the staff by distributing points along the same white gradient. Here are the nodes I used. And then for one last cherry... Anyway, like I was saying, for one last cherry on top, I decided that I'd add an emission shader to the pitchfork texture that would appear at the end as it appeared to make it look like it was glowing and hot and fiery. It's animated using the same slider by outputting the falloff value as an attribute from the geometry node that I can then use as an input value in the shaders. Obviously I had to do some math to make sure it got the right value out, but here's what that looked like. And with that done, I finished the animation, set up the scene and did some fancy camera work, and well, I'll let you see the result for yourself. Please, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy.
Hey, I just met you. This is great.
Yeah, if I didn't appreciate the power of geometry nodes before, I definitely do now. And I feel like I'm still barely scratching the surface with geometry nodes, so I want to give them a 10 out of 10, but this is important. Due to the nature of this video, I didn't get to do as much silly, quirky editing as I would normally like to, so I'm gonna have to take that 10 out of 10 and bump it down to a 2 out of 10, okay? And that's all I have to say on the matter. Peace.